I'm continuing my series of Master Retro reviews with Season 3, Episode 5, OR. Before we get into this episode is a very special episode of MASH. It's the very first episode in which they did not have any scenes with the laugh track. So, for the American audiences, as I understand some international broadcast versions, the previous episodes did not feature a laugh track, but for the US audience, where most of the viewers were, until this episode, there had never been a single one without a laugh track. The closest would be the OR scenes, which traditionally do not feature a laugh track. And this episode being, I would say, like 98% in the OR, doesn't have a laugh track. Now, this episode, like I said, is entirely in the OR, but there are a few scenes outside the OR. There's at least one scene in the scrub room and 2 or 3 scenes in the room that's on the opposite side of the OR from the scrub room. So, nowhere else in the camp, just those 3 rooms, and most of it is in the OR. And the reason for that is because they're handling a lot of patients. And this episode feels longer than many other episodes, and I put that in part to the fact that there is no laugh track, and so therefore the individual scenes last longer, which is what this episode needs. It needs to feel longer, because this is really showing that war is not all funny business. Are there still jokes in this episode? Yes. Did I laugh a few times? Yes. But that laughter was organic laughter, for me finding that joke that the writers chose to put in there to be funny, not because I was prompted by a laugh track. And honestly, I do kind of prefer that, or at least if you have laughter, at least have a studio audience providing the laughing, because at least hopefully then it'll be more organic. But yes, like I said, I did laugh a few times at some small jokes here and there, but this episode is pretty much just drama. The comedy is small bits, nothing major. But should we talk about the moments? Because there's a lot of them. We have Hawkeye treating an Ethiopian soldier. And by the way, over 3,000 Ethiopians saw combat duty in the Korean War over the entire period of time. And after the surgery, Hawkeye and Henry are taking a break in the room next to the OR, and Klinger brings the Ethiopian patient over to Hawkeye so that way the patient can thank Hawkeye. And despite their language barrier, Hawkeye says that is one of his best thank yous, his best payments he has ever given. And that's because the Ethiopian soldier, knowing likely of this language barrier, chose to kiss Hawkeye's hand as a way of showing and saying his thanks despite that language barrier, which is just a great scene there. There's also a scene right before that where Hawkeye and Henry are talking, because Henry had dropped at least 3 different items in OR, and Hawkeye sees the early onset of arthritis in Henry's hand, which would be a way home for Henry. But Henry doesn't really want to, because he feels like he's doing way more doctoring in the entire time he has been in Korea than he's done in his entire private practice back home in Bloomington, Illinois. And so he doesn't want to leave. Now, knowing what we know, probably would have actually gotten home and lived to an old age if he had left after arthritis, and that at the end of season 3. There's a scene where Frank nearly removes a patient's kidney, the patient's only kidney, but Trapper goes over and points out that, you sure about that? And Frank is actually thankful for that, because we are often as fans, just like the characters, make fun of Frank's ability as a doctor, but this does show that while he may be incompetent at times, he may not be the best doctor, he does not want to intentionally harm any of his patients. And that's something we do need to be reminded about his character. While he is not the best doctor or a great person, he does not want to deliberately cause harm to his patients. And then there's another scene later on between Trapper and Frank. Trapper just wants to take a rest, but we learn a little bit more about Frank. Frank basically came from an abusive household, is what it boils down to. And that does actually explain a lot about Frank's behavior, because he's seeking control, but he's also, because it's revealed that he didn't have very many friends growing up, he's also seeking connection. And he did that as a child by becoming a snitch. He even snitched on himself for not snitching on a friend. But that shows a lot about Frank's character and childhood trauma. And speaking of trauma, Sidney Freeman shows up. That's a very poor segue, but we do get the scene where Frank is complaining about psychiatrists because all they think about is basically sex, unquote. That's very Freudian. Even by the time the show is set, psychology was moving beyond Freudian psychology and being a little bit better, but media has always lagged behind in its portrayal of psychologists and therapists and psychiatry, just because Freud makes more entertainment, I guess. They also tapped Sidney to help in OR, despite the fact that he's probably not performed surgery for a long time, if ever. Though it's implied in the dialogue that he has had some experience, and if nothing else, he's another pair of hands. Of course, he only helps with one patient, then he leaves. But that's more because of behind-the-scenes stuff and probably how long they could get the actor. But before Sidney leaves, he gives this line, "Take my advice, put down your pants, slide on the ice." And that line is very associated with Sidney. In fact, in the final episode ever of MASH, he says that line, calling out the fact that he once told them that so long ago. But we'll talk about that when we get there. We got a lot of seasons to go before we get to that point. There's many more scenes too. There's a scene where a fire breaks out and they're all rushing to get the patients out. But Trapper goes to douse the fire with liquid from a basin. Thankfully, it was water and not alcohol, but it could have been. But the wall, so a shell landing there would have been the exact same thing. And probably, even if it was alcohol, it wouldn't have been an explosion, just a flare up because of how alcohol burns. But it does show two things. One, they're in a war situation, and sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. And two, they've been in surgery for quite some time, and therefore probably need a good rest. But probably the most heartbreaking scene, the most sad scene, there's actually two of them. Earlier on in the episode, Hawkeye does an open heart massage on a patient whose pulse had stopped, and about 4 hours later, the patient died, did not make it, which does make Hawkeye feel down. That's when Sidney is still there, and basically that's when Sidney goes to leave after that, as prompted, because basically the idea is occupational therapy, i.e. Hawkeye gets himself in his work, so he's not thinking about that at this time. Again, probably in real life things would have gone differently. Sidney probably would have helped out for a bit longer, but the needs of the narrative took priority over realistics. But there's also the scene where a patient is brought to Henry who would need 2 doctors and at least 8 hours, and there's no guarantee that the patient would survive. In fact, it's likely the patient wouldn't, more than likely. And that's a decision that Henry admits that he does not like making. And Hawkeye tells him that the boy, should never have been brought in there to begin with, which I think was what Henry needed to hear. Like, there was nothing to do anyhow. And then that way they could actually focus on helping who they can help, because they've had a lot of patients. There's probably a good number of wounded men, wounded boys, wounded soldiers there who can be helped, but they focus on this one patient, they won't be helped. And then there's also, going with that too, the sad fact is they're running low on supplies. There's a scene where Henry sends Radar to get some regular sewing thread because they're out of the 3/0 silk that they normally use in surgery. So this just all shows that this is a very serious episode. There are jokes, like Sidney Freeman's line. There's a few other things here and there. They're jokes, but they're not like, oh man, you're getting red in your face from laughing, you can hardly breathe. Nothing like that. And with no laugh track, when things are truly funny, you can laugh if you find those jokes funny. And even then, those jokes are like, I think I only made a sound once, but I cracked a smile a few times, because this episode is not designed to be funny. It's designed to be serious. And that it was. Now, that's where I'm going to end my review, but the comment section is down below. Let's continue the discussion down there. Thank you for watching my video. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to give this video a like and share. Also, consider subscribing to my channel to stay up to date on all my latest content. In the meantime, thank you for watching, and as always, have a good day, a good night, wherever you are. May the force be with you, always.